In the last video, I spoke about the forthcoming siege of Jerusalem and the Messiah's role in it. In this video, I'll give a bit more of an insight into what can be expected once the siege is over and the invasion begins. Okay, we'll get straight into it. We're going to be starting in Ezekiel chapter 5, verse 1. And thou, son of man, so Ezekiel, but also the Messiah to come, take thee a sharp knife, take thee a barber's razor, and cause it to pass upon thine head and upon thy beard. Then take thee balances to weigh and divide the hair. Okay, shaving your head is a sign of mourning. Okay, and God is asking the Messiah to divide the hair. And we're going to see why now as we move into verse 2. Okay. Thou shalt burn with fire a third part in the midst of the city when the days of the siege are fulfilled. And thou shalt take a third part and smite about it with a knife, and a third part thou shalt scatter in the wind, and I will draw out a sword after them. Okay, so burn with fire a third, smite with a knife a third, and a third part shall be scattered in the wind. Okay, so 3/3 obviously make up a whole. Scatter in the wind means people could fall into captivity, but they're just basically sent out, abandoned. Wherever they go, they go. Okay, then. And remember how in Deuteronomy 4 that we looked at in episode 2 in the last video, God said he would scatter the inhabitants among the nations in the latter days. Well, that is reiterated here. Now let's compare that verse there with verse 12. A third part of thee shall die with the pestilence, and with famine shall they be consumed in the midst of thee. We'll come back to that. And a third part shall fall by the sword round about thee, and I will scatter a third part into all the winds, and I will draw out a sword after them. Okay, so this scattering a third, we can confirm that God said the same in verse 2. Shall fall by the sword round about thee. We can confirm that God also said that. Okay, and smite about with a knife. Okay, now this part here, thou shalt burn with fire a third. It doesn't say burn here. What it says is a third part of thee shall die with the pestilence, and with the famine shall they be consumed. Okay, so we know now that this burning, this reference to burning, okay, denotes famine and pestilence. That's what it means when it says burning. Okay, we can see that. Famine and pestilence. And again, we have the 3/3 adding up to the whole. Okay, so as you can see, this is quite a dark prophecy discussing what's going to happen in the land of Israel, okay, particularly obviously the city of Jerusalem. So does this mean God is going to destroy or send into captivity everybody in the city of Jerusalem in these latter days? Well, the short answer is no, not everyone. I'm going to show you who exactly the Lord will spare, but to do so I first want us to visit 1 Samuel chapter 15, and we're going to begin at verse 25. Now, before I start, I'll give you a brief background. God has ordained King Saul to kill all of the Amalekites, man, woman, and child, and to kill all of their livestock, their animals too. However, King Saul disobeyed the order by sparing sheep, oxen, and the leader of the Amalekites, King Agag. At this point, in verse 25, King Saul is finally acknowledging his transgressions before Samuel. Okay. Now therefore I pray thee, pardon my sin, King Saul speaking, and turn again with me, that I may worship the Lord. And Samuel said unto Saul, I will not return with thee, for thou hast rejected the word of the Lord and the Lord hath rejected thee from being king over Israel. And as Samuel turned about to go away, he laid hold upon the skirt of his mantle and rent it. Skirt of his mantle, edge of King Saul's robe. Okay, so Samuel grabbed King Saul's royal robe and tore it. Okay, this here is a symbolic representation of what happens in verse 26, and the fact that God is going to remove Saul from his position as king of Israel. Okay, so I will not return with thee, for thou hast rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord hath rejected thee from being king over Israel. So God has now rejected you, King Saul, from being king over Israel. And to represent that, Samuel tears the corner of King Saul's robe, his mantle. Okay, because the kingdom is being torn away from King Saul. Now, let's return to Ezekiel 5 to see where that fits in. I'm just going to read verse 2 again. Thou shalt burn with fire a third part in the midst of the city when the days of the siege are fulfilled, and thou shalt take a third part and smite about it with a knife, and a third part thou shalt scatter in the wind, and I will draw out a sword after them. Verse 3, thou shalt also take thereof a few in number and bind them in thy skirts. So God is telling the Messiah to take a few of the people in number and bind them in his skirts, in his robe, in his garment. We just saw that word in 1 Samuel chapter 15. So what's happening here? What exactly is going on? Well, although this Messiah is not yet king, okay, we spoke about that in the last video. He's not yet king. The kingdoms have not come together. He's been instructed to gather a remnant of people, those God deems as righteous, in preparation for the messianic kingdom to come, when he will be crowned king of Israel, and God's chosen people will dwell safely in the land promised to them throughout the Bible. Okay, so this is preparation. God is saying, gather a few, okay, gather those that are righteous. There's only a few in number. Remember what's just happened, and bind them in thy skirts. Okay, so here in verse 3, the God of Israel is recognizing this Son of Man, this Messiah, as the future king by telling him to gather a small number of people in his skirt or garment, which directly opposes the actions of Samuel when he tore King Saul's skirt to symbolize that he was to be stripped of his kingship. This is the opposite. Okay, this is gather. Samuel tore King Saul's garment to let him know that the kingdom was being torn away from him. Okay, I hope I've made that clear. Verse 4, then take of them again, so take of this small number, take of them again and cast them into the midst of the fire and burn them in the fire, for thereof shall a fire come forth into all the house of Israel. Even this small number of those saved will be reduced once again, leaving only a tiny proportion of those that originally inhabited Jerusalem. Only a tiny proportion, a remnant. Okay, again, I want to make it clear to you, this sequence of events is still to come. Now, for those that remain skeptical about the information I've been sharing with you, I understand why you feel that you might need a bit more scriptural evidence to support these teachings. So in the next video, I'm going to be referencing a different chapter of God's holy word to confirm everything I've shown you. But between now and then, please take it upon yourself to study scripture for yourself. As I've said before, the Hebrew Bible, known as the Old Testament, is spiritual first and physical afterwards. You'll need to connect with God on his wavelength his holy frequency in order for this to make sense on yours.